this is under the Oslo agreements. So we're going back into the, the late 80s, early 90s. And that was supposed to be a temporary division of the West Bank, which would end with a peaceful settlement where the Palestinians would be free in their own state.
Right? This looks like.
Well, the red is Area C.
The red is Area C, right? So this is the West Bank, right? Right, the geography people kind of know. It's like, right, there's Jerusalem right here. Then all of this is the West Bank. Gaza would be down here on the left, right? Here's Tel Aviv kind of over here, right? And this is the Galilee up north. They divided the Palestinian territories into three parts: Area A, Area B, and Area C. Area A is under total Palestinian control. Those are basically just the cities, right? So you have there's Nablus and Salfit, these like little areas, Hebron. And then there's Area B, joint Palestinian control. That's some of these white areas. Everything else is Area C. That's under Israeli control. Ultimately, it's Palestinian. It's part of the Palestinian Authority, but the people who control the security are the Israeli security forces. Yeah. So as you see, it's like most of it, right? And like and the Israeli politicians who talk about annexation, they talk about annexing Area C and somehow leaving the cities there, not annexed, if that makes sense.
That doesn't make much sense.
It doesn't make much sense.
Makes sense.
We're talking about 2.5 million people, something like that, Palestinian people on the West Bank, and they're now, depends how you count them, but there must be 500,000 settlers planted only in Area C, deliberately planted in Palestinian areas. But that's actually not the end. Just one more second before you read.
Yeah, sure.
There's what has changed the reality very dramatically in the last 2 or 3 years, and it's still going on, is the fact that they now have, along the veteran settlements, many of which, even under Israeli law, are illegal, and others are illegal under Israeli law because they were set up by a government decision, cabinet decision. But along with them, we now have, nobody knows how many, 100, 120, 150, what are called outposts, illegal outposts. All of them, without exception, totally illegal. They're inhabited by these same lunatics that I was describing before. They're popping up like mushrooms everywhere, and they're there because the settlers have discovered a mechanism for stealing land, stealing more land. They make no bones about it. They have no attempt to deny it. On the contrary, they're proud of it, because these little outposts, they now have sheep and goats, herds and sheep and goats, and they invade these Palestinian lands, and they have huge areas that are now annexed to these outposts. So the idea is that they're going to absorb nearly the entire land mass of Area C, and at the same time they're going to drive the Palestinian villagers, shepherds, and farmers out somewhere, anywhere, and if necessary, they'll be quite happy to kill them. In fact, they come, these settlers from the outpost, they keep coming into the villages. They're constantly threatening them. If you, they'll say, okay, first they come in, they create havoc, then they say, if you don't leave within the next 24 hours, we'll come back and kill all of you. All of you, that means women, children, old people, everything. That's the threat. They live with that threat. It's not an idle threat. And let me just say that, we're not able to stop this. We can't, we don't have the manpower to stop the growth of these outposts. But we do keep activists in these villages 24/7, day and night, because the mere presence of Israeli activists, it's not exactly a deterrent, but it has some protective effect. Settlers are afraid of photographs.
Yeah, just so you know, the gathering of the street youth in Jerusalem and bringing them to these outposts, that's actually the settlers' version of the Fresh Air Fund.
Which one?
They advertise this as bringing troubled youth into healthy nature to rehabilitate them. They do, honestly.
What about all of the Israelis in Israel, the people in the cities? They must be aware of what you're talking about. And is there no action on the part of, people there?
There's no action. I mean, they're the activists. Are people who are there. We're talking about very small numbers of people. In Daesh, this group that was mentioned earlier, I don't know, maybe we have.
Are Israelis unaware of what's going on?
First of all, let me say there may be 40, 50, of whom maybe 20 will be active in a kind of ongoing, permanent way. There are people living in the villages now, are activists. Are Israelis not aware? Awareness is a funny thing, You can apparently be unaware, even though on some other level, perhaps this is after all, it's a tiny little place, and it's on the news occasionally and things like that. I think there's a repressed awareness of the cruelty and barbarism of the occupation. Or you could say there's a kind of indifference. It's an ethnic conflict. There are these two people, usually an ethnic conflict. One side demonizes the other side. Both sides demonize each other. That's the standard thing. And now, especially after the massacre on October 7th, let's call them, humane, decent Israelis. There are a lot of people like that. But they've been traumatized.
You can also call it disempowerment or despair. It used to, 20 years ago there were more.
Yeah.
When there would be a big action, then a few hundred people would show up.
Absolutely, yeah. In the early years of Daesh, that was the rule.
But there's fatigue, deep fatigue, and the Israelis on the left, first of all, they've all gone, most of them are less to the left, but those that are still holding those values, they feel like they've tried and tried, nothing works, and they're in despair because every government, even the left-wing governments, have not done really anything about any of this stuff. So
I think there's also a lot of myths and that feed into not being aware. I know I've invited Israeli friends, even some Israeli friends have wanted to go with me into the field or even into, heaven forbid, one of the actual Palestinian towns, and their families have been resistant to letting them go, or angry at them. And the other thing that makes Israelis really angry when I say this, some Israelis, of course, and maybe they're right to be really angry when they say this, but I often say that I went to college and spent a lot of my formative years across a strip of land 2 blocks long, it's called the Midway, which separates the University of Chicago from a really awful ghetto area beyond it, and there was something called redlining, which prevented Black people from buying houses outside of that area in a white area, and nobody seemed to know anything about it except that dangerous people lived there, and the only thing that could kind of break that cycle was just walking in and meeting people there, and going there, I had some very angry responses when I said that to Israeli friends.
Israelis actually do know, but they don't want to know.
Yeah, and it was similar in Chicago.
Yeah, you wanted to ask a question?
So it's the same thing here.
Yeah.
It's, you're
Yeah.
pointing out the same.
I mean, I'm sure that you're, you know, many of you are New Yorkers and clearly you have the same,
Yeah,
same
that's right.
possibility
I mean,
to ignore.
Right, that's right, we shouldn't be surprised, I mean, there's Rikers Island, everybody knows what's going on in Rikers Island, you know?
Yeah.
We run like, almost like a slave plantation system of imprisonment in New York. It's going on and on and on and on and on.
I remember when 9/11 happened and the first photos from Abu Ghraib came and first information. And I remember as a young Israeli who moved, I said, look how quickly people lose their humanity, and these are American who grew up with no connection to Muslim community or the Arab or any of those countries and the people that they were abusing, and how quickly this happens. And I think that was just an example of how quickly people can become indifferent and inhumane without even a history.
Okay.
Your question has been answered,
Oh,
incidentally.
really? I'd like to hear it anyway.
You mentioned, I think I understood you right, and I just want to confirm it. You talked about 40, 50 activists. Could you first define, do you consider, are they activists like you? You consider yourself one of those 40, 50 people? And first, did I get the right number? There are 40, 50. Is it in the whole of Israel, or is it? Exactly. I'm not quite sure. What area does it cover?
I was talking just about this particular group. There are quite a number of organizations, human rights organizations, peace-oriented. You know, there's a lot. There are the Doctors for Human Rights. There's a very important group called the Combatants for Peace. You know, these were people who served in the Israeli army on the Israeli side, and they were in the Palestinian organizations before, and they have a whole process of getting to know one another, and then they become active in the field. I don't know today, but they had the big numbers a few years ago. Still, I mean, we're not talking about like huge numbers of people. If we had, the Palestinians sometimes say to us, you know, it's very nice that you're here, we're glad that you're here, but how come there aren't 10,000 of you guys here? So that's what's needed. You said something that reminded me of a happy moment. There was a time when the Combatants for Peace took a great big group of their members, you know, who are now, you could call them activists. They took them to a Palestinian village that I know well, Beg knows very well, Susia, in South Hebron. So for many of them, for many of the Israelis, this was the first time they'd ever actually seen a living Palestinian in a village, first time ever. If they saw them, they might have seen them cleaning the streets, you know, in the cities or on the building sites. But here was a village, a beautiful village, with a sword of Damocles hanging over every single building there, because they have demolition orders. Anyway, they brought several busfuls of these people, you know, and we were there before them, and I don't know, it's like, what we really wanted them to do was to march into this forbidden hill right next to Susia, where there was a well. Wells are really important down there. It's dry desert area, right? So there was a well that had been stolen by the settlers, and the settlers had put up, like usual, they have vans or their trailers or whatever, and they have big Israeli flag and all that. So the idea was, gosh, we have like 200, maybe 250 or 300 people here with us, these combatants. Let's march them up into the hill and let them, you know, repossess their well for maybe 10 minutes before the soldiers came and drove them off. That's what we wanted to do. But anyway, we had decided, and the leaders of the combatant group said, no, we don't want them to get into any ruckus today. We don't want them to start getting arrested. We don't, you know, so let's not do that. That's what they said. Anyway, as they were getting off the bus, I overheard a conversation that moved me. So there was on the bus, there was like some young Palestinian guy, and there was this young Israeli woman. And they had somehow, I guess, on the bus started to talk, and they kind of liked one another, apparently. So they got off the bus, and I heard the Palestinian guy say to this Israeli woman, he said, "Would you come and visit me in my home?" And she said, "No, there's no way I can do that." Like we said about the parents, right? How could I possibly do that? She'd never been in a Palestinian home before, ever. You know? I can't do it, she said. So he didn't say anything. And then, 2 or 3 or 4 minutes went by, and suddenly she said, "You know what, I'll come." It was a beautiful moment to show what can happen, if you give people that option, that possibility to get to know one another. But the other good thing that happened that day was that although there were the usual speeches, that's an endemic problem in all activism, there were speeches. But they were supposedly not going to, cross the border into this hill with the well. But they couldn't hold themselves back. And so we marched, all of us, 300 people up to the well, And with us was Nasser Nawaz, the activist who we know very well. And
Palestinian.
this is a Palestinian, so this was his family well. But he'd had no access to it for, I don't know, probably 30 years. Something.
Wow.
So anyway, we were there with him, and he lowered a bucket into the well and drew water from his own well for the first time in maybe 30 years or something. Then drank the water. It was like a magical moment. And then, of course, the soldiers came and chased us off. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'll ask my question now.
Yeah.
So, in medicine, when we have problems, we think about them in terms of non-modifiable factors and modifiable factors.
Yeah.
And this paradigm is especially helpful to me when I'm thinking about chronic problems or problems that cause despair. And I wonder if when I ask it that way, what are some, when you look at this and you talk about, you've said several times enough of the depressing stories, which factors, and I think, the relationships not only are modifiable factors, but they generate modifiable factors, right? More and more, the better. What other modifiable factors are there in the situation?
I think I have to say, first of all, that we're losing this battle. We're losing this war. There's no question about it. We cannot hold back the flood. We feel a moral obligation to be with these people and to protect them as best we can. But we can't actually change the structure of that situation, certainly not under the present government or in the present climate, cultural and political and social climate in Israel. We can't change that. On the other hand, we have these very close relationships with these people. They're friends, and their children know us. And I was thinking we would read this passage about Kifach, because she says we used to think that the Jews were just all monsters, and we discovered that their Jews are not monsters, and their children see it. Maybe that's something that is modifiable in some sense.
Yeah, Michael Safar, the lawyer, who worked so hard trying to win, back Palestinian rights, at some point said that he thinks, given they're facing all of the failure, he thinks that his greatest contribution is not actually what he does in Lockhart, but bringing his kids along when he visits.
That's right. I brought Misha down there to a long time ago, 27 years ago. I didn't bring him, I invited him.
And that was, you were talking about that woman who had never been in a Palestinian home. I grew up there and never been in a Palestinian house, never really been to East Jerusalem, even East Jerusalem, like a 10-minute drive from where I grew up. And this was what changed my life. When you took me out there,
Yeah.
when we went to Susia, and then when Ezra took, those were the things. Completely transformed my understanding.
Misha was playing with his Palestinian children, playing ball and all that. It was a beautiful thing to see. It was very natural. And there was a bond. There was a bonding between.
Let's read some of the book.
Yeah, let's read a little bit.
I know David wanted me to read the passage by Keith, but it's by her, and the last thing I want to do is ventriloquize her voice. So I'd rather read a somewhat longer passage, but it shouldn't take more than 5 minutes. It's a chapter and I want to bring the women into this conversation because I'm not sure how many women have been even mentioned so far, but not many, if any. So I'm going to read this, which suggests maybe my encounter with the women, also the kind of situation that they're in, which is not ideal, and brings up some of the things that people think about when they ask about these our work there, which I'm not going to just tell you in advance, but maybe you'll figure it out. Okay, so this is about the village of Khan al-Ahmar, which has been almost destroyed many times, and lies just outside of Jerusalem on a big freeway that was built after, of course, the village. And it's a visit that I took. You were actually there for part of this. Sheathed in plastic. Before I go with that, I say that I couldn't take pictures of the women, so most of the pictures in this section are pictures, they couldn't be allowed to take pictures of the women, so most of the pictures in this section are the first one is emblematic. It's a picture of hands holding what looks like cards, a hand just sheathed with a bunch of cards in it. Sheathed in plastic, the pictures that Jamila Ismail happily brings out to show must have been taken by professional photographers. In perhaps half a dozen, she wears gracefully embroidered dresses, her rich black hair sometimes fully visible. There's even a picture of her as a modern woman in slacks. To photograph these photographs of Jamila is forbidden, just as it is forbidden to photograph the face of Jamila herself. But she allows me to photograph her hands, holding the photographs. Jamila was beautiful when these photographs were taken, and she remains beautiful. Her hair is still shiny, her smile intact, after 11 children, 3 of whom died soon after birth. I can't photograph Mahat's face either. Her home blew down recently in a storm. She'll need 4,000 shekels to rebuild it. Khan al-Ahmar is not very pastoral for a Bedouin shepherding community. The village nestles next to a freeway. Visitors drive through a tunnel beneath the freeway to reach the village. And sheep swarm through it with their shepherds to graze on the rocky hills just above. The Israeli settlement of Ma'ale Adumim looms above Khan al-Ahmar. But the highway and the settlement are newcomers, while the village has been there since the current inhabitants were expelled from the northern Negev in 1953. In 2018, in order to give the settlement more room, it seemed to the government best to schedule the village for demolition and the Bedouins for forcible removal to a site by a garbage dump next to a larger town, Abu Dis. The chief prosecutor at The Hague was of a different opinion, and only her decree prevented the state of Israel from carrying out the plan. For the moment. The moment continues. The village, in suspended animation, waits. Meanwhile, the women continue to hide behind the trees, behind the fences, and behind their beautiful embroidery, which is, of course, what you see in the following pictures. December 2018. Fatma from Susia and another woman huddle over photographs of Susia on Fatma's phone. Susia's not nearby, it's in the South Hebron Hills, as David was saying. The two women bond for a moment over the shared experience of living in villages kept forcibly in primitive conditions and under the constant threat of demolition. But when Fatima turns to issues of women's education, the other woman cuts off discussion flatly. Bedouin women, she says, are meant to stay at home. At strategic moments, whenever the specter of demolition arises, so does the question, wouldn't the women be better off if the community moved, perhaps to an urban center with its economic and social advantages? That's what the civil administration, that is the occupation authority, earnestly recommends for their good. Yet the argument is deceptive because the system of occupation has been intent for years on making life in Palestinian villages like this one so unlivable that everyone there, men, women, and children, will see no other alternative than to leave. Yet there are some glimmers of hope even in Khan al-Ahmar. The friends of the Jahalim, the Bedouin, who include even some few brave souls in Ma'ale Adamim, asked what they could do to help the community. Eid, a leader of the protests against the threatened demolition and expulsions, asked those people to focus on women. He worried that they were at loose ends with no sense of purpose. The Friends supplied, and Friends with a capital F, supplied resources for the women to profit from their embroidery. They engaged a doll maker to teach them and help them expand their repertoire. Some women made rag dolls, some specialized in clothing for the dolls. Doll making was not enough for one shy, retiring young woman. She began to make environments for the dolls, rather like doll houses, to transform bits of cloth and sticks into a model of her world of tents and cradles. And she put the dolls themselves to work, rocking the cradles. She's become a lively and confident person, and she has even earned some money by selling some of these miniature houses. Things may change, even in Jamila's household. One granddaughter has just finished her education at the local school. On holiday now, the school's energy is still apparent in the 8th grade classroom, where, and I'm embroidering here, I'm ad-libbing here, where Bisha said, well, it just looks like any schoolroom in Brooklyn. Which it does. The children have built models, bright colors are teeming with ideas and hanging from the ceiling and covering the walls. This granddaughter plans to continue her secondary education in Jericho next semester. This rather unusual step will cost her money, and she will need transportation. And perhaps after that, she will be the first in her family, certainly the first woman, to attend university. It will be difficult. Her father will have to let her go, and she will have to find the money. She may blaze a trail. So of course, the school that inspired these thoughts, like most Palestinian schools in the territory, is a prime target for demolition.
You should see the pictures that go with this little vignette that you just heard. And Peg, of course, has privileged access to the women, although I know Palestinian women, but you have spent huge amounts of time with them, right? And, as friends. Yeah. I was going to read just something very short. This book has chapters. You know what? There's another thing I have to say before I read you. Because everything is so precarious now, and there are villages that are being abandoned because they can't survive the harassment. We have said to ourselves more than once that this could be the last documentation of an entire way of life that is very much in danger of disappearing, So, having said that, let me just say that there are chapters There are chapters about the difficult things we've been talking about. There's a chapter about house demolitions. There's a chapter about settler attacks. There are interviews with the activists, as Beck mentioned, you know. And then we have what we call lahzat. Lahza in Arabic means just a moment, a little short moment, let's say of respite, of rest, something like that. And many of them are connected to drinking tea, because they drink tea all the time. They drink tea almost nonstop, all day long, you know. So a tea break, that's a moment with the sheep out in the field. And tea, it turns out, has a lot of potential meaning also. So I think I'm going to read you two of these lahzat. They're short. I mean, there's a lot of them. I don't know how many we put in this book, but there are quite a few moments of
Maybe about
respite.
12 or 13.
What is that?
About 12.
12, okay.
Dozen.
Yeah, that would be good. That's great. But just a second, because I want to remember where the other one is. Just a second.
You're looking for the one we recorded?
No. We'll find it again. It's page numbers are not very inaccessible here. It's page 49. But first, you can read this one about Said.
The whole page?
Yeah, just read the page, the whole page.
Lahza, tea and protest. At al-Arais, tea is an idiom of defiance. We arrive early, in summer before 7 a.m. The shepherds are already out on the hills. We pass the tiny encampment of Simri and continue over the hill and down to the wadi that the settlers have stolen. We might even get there before the army jeep shows up. Soon Said arrives and his wife Rima and 3 or 4 of his children and other men from Muhammad clans. Said gives the sign. We march into the forbidden wadi, thick with thorns and yellowing grasses. A remorseless sequence takes its course. Settlers may descend upon us. They may attack. Sometimes the soldiers will join them in beating us. There may be arrests. Once they arrested 10 of us, including a baby nursing at his mother's breast. The officer will definitely produce the order declaring this wadi a closed military zone. For a long time, there was a standing order signed by some distant general, so the CMZ was a mere formality. We argue, we show the Supreme Court ruling from 2004 that says the CMZ is illegal. Said, invariably soft-spoken, lucid, repeats to the officer what he had said 1,000 times before. The officer shrugs him off, or threatens him, or screams at him and turns away. We are in no hurry to leave. We know our continued presence in the wadi is a necessary, but not sufficient condition for the hope that one day this land will be restored to its owners. It's been over 10 years and Said hasn't given up. The soldiers begin to push and poke at us from behind. We hold our ground. We wait for Said's signal. We leave the wadi as slowly as we can and climb partway up the hill over white rocks. Twigs, thorns, a few dead branches are teased into flame. We nurse our wounds, our rage. Then, tea. The children crowd around the fire. The soldiers stare at us from the jeep as we drink. We stare back with contempt. There are the bitter words, ours and theirs, and there is the insouciant sweetness of tea, liquid faith, a golden weapon, unlike theirs, and infinitely stronger. You will see, one day, tea will win, and the soldiers will leave.
Let's read one more of these.
Do you want this one?
Yeah, that's right. Okay, Misha, should have a look at the tea on the rocks. I don't know if you can see it.
It's a cup of tea on the rocks.
Oh, yeah.
Lahza, morning tea. Always surprised that pure light has taste. It's not just any light, Never a single defined color, a little dusty like dawn in the desert. You pour this light out of a pot, usually one blackened by 1,000 fires. As it pours, you can also hear the light speaking. It says different things depending on who is listening. Some quite matter of fact, like Shobelion. It's hot today, and therefore time for tea. Others more practical, like Allah yahfazak, may God care for you. Or a little sad, like Wen hal gibe, where the hell have you been?
Poetry.
Maybe see if people want to respond, ask questions. I don't know.
Are you and fellow activists able ever to get on major media within Israel over the last 10 years, or are you ignored?
No, we're not ignored completely. It's a little bit easier to get foreign correspondents to come down with us into the territories. Some of you may have seen a long article in the New York Times about a week ago, 10 days ago. It's written by Ronin Bergman. He tells the whole story of how we reached this low point today where there's like no law, no order, no hope. He explains it. So, and we've brought, actually I happen to live across the street literally from the New York Times correspondent. All of them over the years. We've known all of them and their kids and their families and all that. So we've become friends with the current New York Times correspondent there, and he's, let's just say he's on our side of the fence more or less, although he's very careful in what he writes.
This is Kingsley?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Kingsley, yeah. But he's come down with us several times and written very beautifully about what he's seen there. I mean, he's seen the reality of it and he's prepared to write it. The Manchester Guardian always has correspondents who are capable of doing that. Within Israel, Haaretz, which is the only really respectable newspaper in Israel, it has a correspondent who just won a big journalistic award. Hagar Shizaf is her name. She's very good, and they print what she writes in Haaretz. They're, it's a bit like the question of awareness that was raised earlier. If you want to take in the information and confront the reality, that's not a problem. It's available to you. If you don't want to, you might just skip those parts of the paper, like that, yeah.
Could you tell, for people who weren't there in December, could you describe why you use the Facebook Live and the whole documenting of the violence?
Yeah, so documentation is another thing that we can do. I mean, in a way, it's perhaps the only thing we can do. And we're there beside them, largely, I think, in order to somehow alleviate their incredible loneliness. They're incredibly alone. And the mere fact that we're with them has some meaning, They have this huge system to just weighing them down. But we can also document. And, there have been times when we happened to document something that was like really terrible. For example, there was a moment at Susia where this masked settler with his gun actually tried to kill one of the activists, friend of mine, Ranan. And we had a photographer with us who caught it on the screen. It was an amazing thing. Fortunately, he didn't actually kill him, although he hit him hard with the butt of his rifle and big head wound. But so then the settlers who saw the fact that this guy had recorded this on tape, they immediately went for the camera. They hate cameras. So they grabbed this camera and smashed it on a rock. But he, with unbelievable presence of mind, he slipped the cartridge with the film into his pocket before they got the camera. And we got it to the television. It was on the national news at 8 o'clock that evening. That for us was like, you know, an unusual achievement. And in those days, I think it had more of an impact. Today, I don't know if the television would even bother to show it, but that's certainly a part of what we do. And also, there's a question of documenting it for posterity, because someday the nightmare will end. And believe me, there are huge archives now of we've done, the other activists, things that are happening in the territory. Some future historians will have plenty of material to work from.
Well, there's a huge archive at Salem. That's one of the things, I mean, that was what I was going to write about, was this documentation and how it's done. Not, wasn't going to be doing any of it, but the Salem archives were a place that I visited while I was still on that project. It's just vast. It's
Yeah.
going to be very important.
You talked about how it was just failing, how the settlers and the settlement movement, year after year, has more victories, expels more Palestinian communities, takes over more land for exclusive use of Jewish people. But there have also been successes, and I think prove the effectiveness of the documentation and the solidarity presence. I'm thinking in particular about the sanctions against a number of settlers by the Biden administration, by the British government, the French government, including many, at least some settlers from the south of Bryn Hills, where we've been active for years. What do you view of the significance of those sanctions? Is it enough? Are they worth anything in the context of what has been in many cases successful ethnic cleansing?
I think they're enormously important in the long run. In the short term, these settlers, even these, I mean, they targeted a few, not very many, a few, including people whom we know as truly like brutal, sadistic criminals. But they don't care, you know. So they're not going to be able to get a visa to come to New York. But they don't want to go to New York. They want to steal more Palestinian land. And even the economic sanctions on them, their bank accounts have been closed and all that. I mean, you know, they can operate, they have tons of money, they can operate with a cash economy, that's how they are. Basically, they thumb their noses at it. But I suppose, I mean, you know, it's all part of a huge process. I don't know, I suppose. Things happen. Suppose the International Court issues the warrants for arrest that they're considering now. And then there are these names that are by now, you know, part of the public discourse. And maybe within Israel too, some effect may eventually happen because of this. At the moment, it's not, we're seeing absolutely no improvement on the ground. Now, I mean, you know, the government, if it wanted to, could stop the whole nightmare, but it doesn't want to do that. I want to go back a step, however, because your question, and it's an important question. So if we think of the situation, I don't know, let's say 5, 6, 7 years ago, we had a lot of success with land cases, you know. Where like in a field, a whole valley, villages, you know, grazing grounds, have been appropriated, stolen by the settlers. Right? So I think in more than 2/3 of the cases we were involved in, that's a lot of cases too. Eventually it ended up with the Israeli civil courts finding in favor of the Palestinian landowners, the original owners. In order for that to happen, the landowners, and we with them, we had to go into their land at least once a week, usually on Saturday, and maintain some kind of physical continuity, some continuous presence. And we had to document every time the army came and threw us off of the field, right? And we had to document the illegal closed military zone order. Then we had lawyers who would take all this material to court. And it was a long process. let's say, in most cases on an average 3 to 4 years of keeping up with that, every week going back to the same field, every week being thrown off with it. But in the end, I would say 60-some% of the cases ended with the land reverting to the original owners. That doesn't change the sort of structural situation in South Hebron, but it makes a huge difference sometimes for thousands of people, these families who got there in one time. That's not an insignificant thing. But as I said earlier, it's no longer the case that we can hope for any kind of succor from the courts. That's over now. Yeah.
First of all, thank you so much. And when you say courts, I assume the domestic courts, but is there any hope for the international courts?
Yeah, I think there is hope for it. I think so. Sometimes I think on an optimistic day, I don't have a lot of them. Still, on an optimistic day, I say to myself, we're at a stage which was like the height of the apartheid period in South Africa when it was just beginning to crumble. Something like that. You could call it a kind of process of decolonialization or something like that. Decolonialization in a case like South Africa, in a case like Israel, it often takes the form that looks like colonization, But actually it's not. It's a more complex project, and the whole. This is something that takes time, and there are underground currents that nobody can even guess at today. And as I say, on a good day, I sometimes think it's beginning to crumble, and it will reach a point where at least the upper echelons of the security apparatus in Israel, and they're really important. That is the Mossad, the military intelligence, the chief of staff, the whole of the upper echelon, they, I think, may eventually, just through the force of circumstances, they may realize that we cannot go on like we have been. I've heard from people, actually, who are well connected in the army, that already there are voices like that. People who understand that the occupation has got to end, and this kind of rampant violence and the racism and the whole horrible thing and all, there's no way the state will be able to survive if that maintains its own destructive course. But it may take a long time, and a lot of people will die on the way. That was also true in South Africa, by the way.
Thank you.
David, in your opinion, if somehow miraculously Saudi Arabia is pulled back into a serious discussion of normalizing relations with Israel, what effect, if any, do you think that will have on what's going on within the government?
I'm not so good at prophecy.
In your opinion, I mean, just armchair, take a stab.
Look, I think Netanyahu will do everything in his power to be sure that there is no Palestinian state. He has an idée fixe about that. And he's not alone in that. And if there are elections sometime in the course of the next year, let's say, I don't know, could happen, he will campaign. His campaign will be based on this kind of endless hatred and threat. In other words, the Palestinians, they all have a lie. That's what he does. He incites hatred. And he might win that election because of that. But
he might lose the election because of that.
he might. It's possible, yeah. It's possible. I mean, there are like lots and lots of really good people in Israel. High density of wonderful people. That's one reason to live there.
To me, what is curious to me, first of all, thank you very much. Is when the stories you told also about, when you said this, the sun was rising. I don't remember the beautiful words, you know, the sheep came down. And this, you know, I know this from Southern Italy, Calabria. They all come down, you know. But what seems to me is interesting when I hear this also is this relationship to nomadic cultures, right? And cultures that move, you know, able to live in richer, and then urban cultures arriving. Yeah. And but you know, it was interesting when Misha showed the map too. You know, okay, but having been in Israel, I know when you talk about urban centers, you know, whether it's Tel Aviv or Nablus or Haifa, you know, it's a small place, right? And it's very urban, isn't it?
Yes.
You know? And in America, we went to the same thing. If you look at the Native Americans, there were the same conflicts. You know, there was the Netanyahu of the 19th century was Andrew Jackson, right? And we know the same role for the Roma, for the Gypsies in Europe, right? Going from place to place, you know, where it's very different if you're in Spain now, where they found another model, or in the Czech Republic or other places, you know, where, or you got a southern Italy, the Gypsies live next to the garbage.
Martin, I'm going to jump in because I was about to say that I've been charged with the ugly task of minding the time. So I would love to let you ask your question and say we probably have time for one more. But I want to give everyone time to talk to one another and mill around and get some fresh air in the garden and continue the conversations. And also, after Martin's question, when you wrap up, could you explain the materials that are over here?
Oh, sure.
And,
Maybe you should do
but
that.
Martin.
Yeah. I mean, what you said is right. Let me perhaps I should answer.
Yeah, my question very simply is, isn't there also a social dimension that transgresses being Palestinian or Israeli?
So yeah, you know, the conflict between the settled population and the Bedouins, that's an endemic structural feature of the entire Middle East. It goes back to the days of Hammurabi, and you know and actually Islam. If you think about Islam in the Middle East, it's kind of home ground. So it's the story of the sort of nomadic Bedouin pastoralists settling down and becoming farmers. That's the story, and it's true today in Israel, but not quite in the same brutal way that we've been describing here. Do you understand what I mean? I mean, it's not just a matter of the cities and the nomads. Most of them, anyway, by now are no longer nomadic. They're settled on the land. It's now a question of sort of ethnic conflict and hatred, and you know, the nation state and what comes with the nation state.
Actually fighting over the land, not the right to roam freely wherever they feel on it. They have villages there. The notion of nomad most often means that they may have a winter grazing ground and a summer grazing ground. So they're sort of like, you know, people who have a second home on, you know, upstate New York or something.
It's hot in the summer.
And nomads like that.
Do you want to just say something about the materials there?
Over there you will find a few different kinds of materials. One of them are a bunch of little booklets that David and I had made for an exhibit that we had together, which was closed very early by COVID, and so I have tons of them. You are welcome to take one. I don't have enough for everybody, but you can just take one home. I have many more where that came from. Then there are a few books that you can peruse, look over. A couple of computer monitors where you can maybe scroll through pictures or an e-copy of the book itself, if that works, which I'm not sure. It will just go off and I'll have to press my own finger on it to make it work again. And the other thing, finally, is the pre-order forms. The book itself will be out either at the end of June or the middle of July, but we have pre-order forms that you can use to order them now. And you could take, of course, those, you could take more than one, hand them out.
Yeah, right.
Can I ask just one thing that I'm sure a lot of people are wondering about? How do you understand the current state of affairs in Gaza and what's going on right now? And what can you offer us in terms of understanding this moment?
Okay, so first of all, the moment is incomprehensible. That's one problem with this moment. We have different vantage points in which we get to view it. I really see its effect here in the United States, where I think Gaza is acting as some kind of a proxy for cultural wars here. And which is really disastrous, but its effect is mostly here. And then, except for the fact that our government is supporting the disaster. But I think you're best positioned to talk about the kind of devastation that it's causing in Israel. We get asked a lot whether I think Israel is committing genocide, and I say I actually don't know whether it's committing genocide in any classic meaning of the term, but it's committing suicide. That I feel is happening. But you are better positioned
You don't know.
to talk about this. It was grim when I went, but I only been there a few weeks during the whole time of the war.
Israel, I think Israel has lost the war a long time ago. I have to say about me personally, at first, immediately after the massacres, really horrendous massacre on the 7th of October, I thought, yeah, they're going to have to go into Gaza, and they're going to have to go after those guys. That's what I thought. I wasn't sure it was wise, but I understood the need to do it. But it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked. They've killed maybe 12,000 Hamas fighters. That's maybe a third of the armed Hamas people now.
And the hostages are not back.
What?
And the hostages are not back.
And the hostages are not back.
Nothing.
And every place that they've already conquered and then left, Hamas just pops right back up. So I don't think you can do what they set out to do, which is to destroy the Hamas.
You don't think you can destroy Hamas by killing every last Hamas fighter? That's not what Hamas is.
That's right.
It's a whole.
It's more surgical.
It's an idea, actually, Hamas. You can't kill an idea with bullets.
No, that's right.
And the hatred is there. One should have no illusion about Hamas. They're brutal terrorists, there's no doubt. But the thing that most troubles me, and has from the very beginning, is the thought that even, let's say, they were to actually somehow remove the military and political power that the Hamas had, so that Gaza would belong to somebody else, would be ruled by somebody. Even if they were able to do that, they have no intention whatsoever of making peace. See, it'd be one thing if you said, okay, they're going to, because the moderate Arab states like Saudi Arabia, the Sunni states, Margaret, Jordan, they were at first very happy that Israel was fighting the Hamas. They fear it. And with very good reason, because they have problems with fundamentalist Islam at home. But Israel, that's not part of the Israeli game plan at all. They're not trying to destroy the Hamas in order to make peace with the moderate Palestinian mainstream. That would be the obvious thing to do. And to join this kind of American, coalition that Biden is suggesting. That's the only way out of this mess. There is no other way out. And that's the killer, because what does it mean? It means this constant danger that the war is going to expand to Lebanon or even to Iran. Netanyahu himself has a vested interest in prolonging the war. The war is not going anywhere. There's no reason to believe that even if they I don't know, kill another 2,000 Hamas people in Rafah, that's going to make any difference. It's deeply wrong and stupid. And there is another thing which I think we have to say, and that is that we now know more about why the civilian casualties in Gaza were so high. So I can tell you what you could read about it if you want. There's a really good essay by somebody called Yuval Avraham. It published it in an internet journal called 972. 972 is the Israeli area code, you know. Maybe 2 months ago or 3 months ago, I don't know. He described the way targets were chosen, are being chosen, were chosen in Gaza. It's a horrific thing, and this probably is I think this is perhaps the first war in the planet that is being run by artificial intelligence. And look what happened. So, it's a pretty grim prognosis, I'm afraid.
And on that happy note,
Well, we decided to make it upbeat.
Yeah, right. It's hard to do that.
You know, after every mass shooting, they say prayers for the victims, prayers for the victims. And so I want to say, let's, you know, prayers for a better thing. But the truth is that, you know, people doing stuff which do exist. They're small, but they're there. They exist, and they're the numbers are not 40 people. It's the hundreds of organizations, dozens of organizations, a lot of people. You know, it's not like the flame is out. You know, and so when my dad says, you know, one day when this thing is all over, right? He means that this thing will one day be over, and that it'll happen through the existence of these people like that, and our support here for the people there. So thank you, Peg, and thank you, Abba, and thank you to Andy and Amanda for providing the space, and to Judy for bringing the wine and the fruits, and Itamar for hooking us up with the recording, and to all of you, and stick around and read some books and
have some conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.